So my guest this week barely needs any introduction. It is fantastic crime writer Peter James, who is #1 best-selling global superstar. Peter, I mean, how else can I put it? He's sold in excess of 20 million books.
Keep going. Yeah, it's great.
I was thrilled to see that your latest book, Left You Dead, has gone straight in #1 in the charts. Which, would we expect anything else?
Well, you never know. I kind of every now and then something like a 50 Shades of Grey comes along that you can't get past. But I'm always hopeful, and I'm very lucky to have so many wonderful fans who buy my books. I feel I never ever forget that.
Yeah, that's one of the things that actually I was going to talk to you about, because I don't think I've ever met a set of more devoted and loyal readers than fans of Peter James. I mean, I was in a couple of forums and Facebook groups when they were talking about bringing Roy Grace to the screen, and there was so much anticipation about who was going to play Roy Grace, and what would he look like, and how people pictured him and things like that. So it was interesting to see all the fans' interaction. You must, I mean, do you watch that kind of thing? Do you sit from afar and peek?
Well, totally, yeah, and I love it. I mean, because I mean, everybody has their own view on social media, but I've been lucky. In the years that I've been writing, my fan mail has evolved from letters, into kind of email, and now into all kind of different aspects of social media. But I learn a lot from feedback. I'll sometimes get a fan saying, "Oh, I work in intensive care. You got that detail wrong." So I'll say, well, next time I have an intensive care scene, would you read it first? And they will. So I've built up a huge network of researchers, whether it's a character in the book speaking German, or the tachometer on a lorry, whatever it is. There's always somebody that will write to me. I mean, I do owe a special thank you to the gentleman who wrote me an 8-page letter recently with diagrams explaining to me the difference between cement and concrete.
Okay.
I'm still actually none the wiser, but I am grateful. And then I occasionally get the odd sort of short, sharp one, like, "Dear Mr. James, I thought you did your research. Your novel Twilight, page 147. Let me inform you that brass does not rust, it corrodes."
All builds towards the authenticity, though.
Totally, and I love it. I love it when somebody pulls me up on something and I've got it wrong, because I try really hard to get everything right, so that whatever I'm writing, if I'm writing about a taxi driver, then anyone who's ever been a taxi driver will kind of recognize it, or a lawyer, or whatever. So it is helpful to get these sometimes snarky letters.
But all appreciated.
Yes.
We do have an advisor in common, Graham Bartlett, who I believe you work with for the Roy Grace books. He has been so helpful. I'm a kind of fledgling crime writer myself, and he's been so helpful in helping with the police procedures. And I think you worked with his predecessor as well when Roy Grace first came on the scene. Is that right, at Brighton and Hove?
Yeah, his predecessor is actually here in my house at the moment. Dave Gaylor was the role model for Roy Grace. I first met Dave in 1997 when he was a young detective inspector, actually at Hove Police Station. And because my kind of relationship with the police goes back to 1981, when I had my first book published, which was a not very good spy thriller called Dead Letter Drop. And we just got married and we got burgled, and this young detective called Mike Harris came to the house to take fingerprints, and he saw the book and he said, "Oh, if you ever want research help with the police, give me a call." And he was married to a police officer, Renata, and she worked on the child protection team at Brighton Police Station. And they invited my then wife and I to a barbecue that summer, and there were a dozen of their friends there, and they were all cops. There was response, homicide, traffic. And I just found talking to these people fascinating. And I thought, wow, from a writer's standpoint, Nobody sees more of human life in a 30-year career than a police officer. And that was the start of it for me. And when they realized that I was genuinely interested, not just out to get a story I could flog the local paper, the Argus, they started to invite me out on patrol to do shifts with them. And it got to the point by the mid-90s where they'd be phoning me and say, we're going on a raid tomorrow, do you want to come with us? Or
Oh, amazing.
we're going out on the in a helicopter looking for such and such, or we're going out on the dive boat looking for a dead body. And I sort of, and then almost became, in a nice way, kind of part of the furniture of Sussex Police. They started to they trusted me.
Yeah.
They knew that if they told me something and they didn't want it to appear, it wouldn't appear. And in 1997, a detective I knew said, oh, you ought to meet this guy, Dave Gaylor. I think you'd get on with him. And I went into Dave's office, and he was a young detective inspector then. And I've never seen an office so untidy in my life. It was just covered in plastic crates, bulging with manila folders. Right at the very back of it, Dave's head was just about visible above a column of. And I said, oh, yeah, are you moving office? And he said, no. He said, I'm a homicide detective, but I've also been tasked with reopening all the unsolved murders in the county of Sussex, where there is still somebody alive who could benefit from an investigation, either an offender still at large or a member of the family that would dearly love to have closure. I've been charged with looking at all these and seeing if modern advances in DNA, fingerprint technology, forensics in general can move any forward. And he said to me, what are you writing at the moment? And I was about halfway through a psychological thriller called Denial. And he said, tell me about it. And I started telling him about it. He said, hang on a sec, why is your character doing that? Why haven't you got a detective doing this? And isn't there an outside inquiry team?
Wow.
And I thought, wow, this guy has got a really creative side to him. And he helped me hugely on Denial and on the next couple of books I wrote. And he got promoted up to Detective Chief Superintendent, the head of major crime for Sussex, effectively. And I was asked in 2002 by my publishers, Macmillan, if I'd ever thought of creating a detective as a central character. I went to, and Dave and I had become good mates at that point. So I took him out to lunch and I said, would you like to be a fictional cop? And he loved the idea, completely loved the idea. Of course, Roy doesn't look like him, but so much of Dave is in Roy. And over the next, ever since then, we've met at a same table in a particular pub with a brand new moleskin notebook. And we plan out each Roy Gray's book. He then reads the first 100, 150 pages. We sit down, he tells me how Roy and any other police officers would really think and act from his own experience. And then over the years, as he approached retirement, he was introducing me to more and more police, both in Sussex, London, and around the world. And one of them was Graham Bartlett. And Graham Bartlett had also had Dave's role at one point of being head of major crime. And then he'd moved to commander of Brighton and Hove. And Graham is just a wonderful guy. I mean, this guy was commander of Brighton and Hove. He took me out 2 o'clock in the morning, driving around the back streets of Shoreham looking for a deposition site. And,
oh my God.
For my book. And Graham, so after Dave retired, although we still worked very closely together, Graham became my kind of key point person at Sussex Police for a long time. And Graham said to me one day, he said, I think you're writing a book. And I thought, half the coppers I've ever met in my life say that, and they'd say, would you mind taking a look at it? And I'll say, look, I can't read the whole book, but send me the first chapter. And I know how it's going to start. I was proceeding in a westerly direction when all happened. They write the way they take statements.
Yeah.
Anyhow, Graham said, I've written a few essays. He said, will you take a look at them? I said, of course. So I was surprised. I thought, this guy's got a real fluid, you can tell me, I'm sure you can as a fledgling author. You can pick up a book and you can tell Amisha if you're going to like it or not.
Yeah.
You can tell from the first page if you're going to like a book or not.
Yeah, you just know, don't you?
And I thought, Graham's got a really good way of writing. So I kind of encouraged him. It was great to be able to give something back to him.
I'm so glad you did. I've read the two books that you've wrote together, the Death Comes Knocking, which is about Graham's story with how it fits in with Roy Grace, and then obviously the Babes in the Wood story as well, which Graham wrote with in conjunction with you.
There's been a major development in that.
I know, yeah, with the DNA.
Convicted. Yeah.
It's incredible after all these years that it should finally reach its conclusion. And about time as well. But yes, so and then Graham was actually on the podcast a few weeks ago, and we've become quite good friends. And he was telling me that he's writing a book, but he's writing it from a female perspective. So I was winding him up about that. But so I can't wait, because I think he's got such a great style.
He's a good human being. Which a lot of police are. I think he exemplifies everything that's good.
Yeah, and his son's on the force now.
Yes. But my partner, my wife Laura, has often said, Graham's such a nice guy. I can't imagine him ever being a tough copper.
Yeah.
So I saw him in action, and he could go switch. In a way, not a psycho way, but that kind of hard professionalism is there beneath the surface.
Yeah.
Graham is that classic example. I've often heard it said that people say that a police officer's best weapon is their voice. The way they speak.
Interesting. Yeah. Very good.
They can diffuse the situation by talking the right way. Far better than by force.
Yeah, that's very, very good, very interesting. Just scribbling that down to use in my next book.
Dude, I've got two great mates. Use it. I've got two great mates in the NYPD, both detectives. And one he's been in many of my books as himself, Pat Lanigan.
Right.
Very laconic guy. He started life as in the U.S. Navy. Then he became a stevedore in the docks, and then he joined the police. And he's an Irish American. He's about 6'6", the gentlest, kindest guy you've ever met. And he's buddied up for years with this guy called Dennis Bootle. Dennis is lovely too. Dennis is short, gun nut, and to Pat's Democrat, Dennis is absolute Republican, died in war. In his career as a cop, Pat Lanigan, I think only fired his gun about 5 times.
Oh, wow.
Never shot anybody. In his time, Dennis shot 9 people dead.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, and Pat's attitude is, it's how you speak to them. Dennis is how you shoot at them.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's the difference, isn't it? So I'm just going to ask you a few questions about Roy Grace, and then we're going to move on to something else. But just for my own personal reasons, Peter, because I've been a fan and I've read all your books, and there is a couple of things that I want to know from my writer's perspective. When you came up with the character Roy Grace, did you know he was going to hang around for so long?
No, I genuinely didn't. I'd never written a serial character before. That's a lie. When I wrote my first spy thriller, Dead Letter Drop, I had a character called Max Flynn, who was my kind of secret agent, and he made it into the second book, Atom Bomb Angel. But that was back in 1981, 82. I'd always written standalones. And so when I was asked to create, if I'd like to create a new fictional detective, and so I had my base model of Dave Gaylor. But I thought really hard about what all the fictional detectives that I'd read and knew and loved. And there's a common denominator that certainly among the male detectives, they seem to have a drink problem and a broken marriage.
Yeah.
And I knew from my experience of being with the police that any officer with a drink problem in today's police force wouldn't last 24 hours. They would just be gone. And I thought, what the detectives do and what they primarily do is solve puzzles. Every homicide, every major crime is a huge puzzle, hundreds, thousands of little pieces that have to be painstakingly put together. And I thought, what about creating a detective who's got a personal puzzle of his own that he cannot solve? So he functions as Grace functions as a very effective homicide detective and cold case detective. But all the time, he's been trying to solve the puzzle of what happened to his missing wife, Sandy.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, what I'll do is say, when we first meet Roy in Dead Simple, it's coming up to his 39th birthday. And we learned that his wife, Sandy, who he loved and adored, had vanished off the face of the earth 9 years earlier. And for the past 9 years, he's been looking for her. He's tried everything, even going to mediums, clairvoyance. He doesn't know, did she run off with a lover? Did she change her identity? Did she get murdered, have an accident? Did she commit suicide? Did she get kidnapped by some lunatic? And so I thought, well, I'll set up the mystery in Dead Simple, and in book 2, Looking Good Dead, I'll resolve it. Dead Simple came out, and I was inundated with emails from readers saying, we think we know where Sandy is, we think we know what's happened. I thought, yeah, well, I could have some fun with this.
Interesting, yeah.
And so that was the sort of, in a way, the kind of thread for so many of the subsequent books. Then, as I'm sure you know, Roy eventually does find out, and we find out too, that Sandy wasn't quite a wonderful woman that he idolized.
Yeah.
And there's still some ongoing resonances from that now.
Yeah, it's good. It's good that with the whole drinking and broken marriages and things like that, it becomes a bit tired after a while, doesn't it? Because you just expect if I pick up a book and I read the blurb and I think that I see that the detective's got something going wrong in his home life, it kind of puts me off now. And I think, I know where you're going to go with that.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, I know a lot of detectives, and I've spent time with many, and not that many do have broken marriages. You get some. I mean, the divorce rate in the police is high, but not specifically among detectives. It's high because they're working antisocial hours, and also with detectives, what does tend to happen is, and I remember another senior police officer I know in Sussex, and I was out to dinner with him and his wife a few years back, and I said to her, Tracy, does Steve ever really annoy you through his work? And she said, all the bloody time. She said, like 3 weeks ago, we're out for our wedding anniversary. We're in this taxi in Brighton, going to a nice restaurant. It's 7:30 at night. And Steve suddenly sees this villain he's been looking for 3 years. He stops the taxi. He says, listen, go to the restaurant, order me a gin and tonic. I'll be there as quick as I can. And he jumps out of the taxi and races off after this bloke. And she said, I'm still sitting in the restaurant at 11 o'clock while he's in custody, still booking him in.
Oh, wow. Joys of being married to a police officer.
Yeah, you can't take, it's very hard to take the job out of them.
Yeah. And I suppose you kind of on duty 24/7 as well, aren't you? I suppose they had that luxury of being able to just switch the phone off and say, no, if it's a case that's ongoing, then you've got to, God, the chances of that though, going past a villain as you're on your way for your wedding anniversary. So out of everything that you've done so far, Peter, so the TV show Grace was so well received. It had nearly 10 million viewers, I think. 8.7 watched it live on the night, and then watched it on the recording as well. I think it's something like that. How did that come about? I know you've got a history, haven't you, of writing for TV shows, and you've done film production and things like that in the past. Did you have much of an input, or?
Yeah, I had a lot of input. I mean, my background before I was able to make a living as an author, I was writing and producing film and television. And I knew from my background just how little most producers care about the source material.
Right.
Producer makes their money out of getting a film made, out of the production fees. So if you got a detective in Brighton, well, hey, what about making him a Chinese police officer in Hong Kong if we can get it made? But there's no anything to get the thing done. So when Dead Simple came out, and I was lucky. It was an instant success. And we had almost everybody in England after it. And I said to my agent, I do not want to let the rights go unless we can keep some control. Because I'd had the experience, I'd had 3 books previously made. And Host, which is one of my favorite books I've ever written, was made into a $11 million miniseries in America. Big cast. It had Mimi Rogers, who was married to Tom Cruise at the time. Jake Lloyd from Star Wars. It had Robert Vaughn, the man from Uncle.
Wow.
And it was dreadful. And I was at a party in Brighton, and just having a what do you do conversation with this guy who was a builder. He said, "Oh, you're a writer." I said, "Oh, anything of yours on telly?" I said, "Actually, yeah, my book Post, it's on at the moment, but they've changed the title. It's called Virtual Obsession." And his face fell off a cliff. He said, "Look, please don't take this personally, but the wife and I watched the first episode, and we thought it was so bad we'd never bother to read you as an author."
Oh my God.
And that was a big salutary lesson, because, you know, a television series is going to be watched by between 5 and 10 million people. You know, a best-selling author in England is going to be selling a few 100,000 copies of their book. But, you know, the vast amount of people, their first encounter with you as an author would be through that television. So I was adamant, and thank God I was, because like 4 years on and 4 more books later, get this very excited phone call from this production company, like clearly a 3-year-old running it, saying, "Oh, BBC Scotland want to put up all the money." Why does BBC Scotland want to finance a television series set in Brighton? No. They think it could be moved to Scotland. I said, "Are you serious?" Yes. "Has anybody read the books?" "Oh, yes. I said, we think we could, Roy Grace could be transferred to Aberdeen Police." I said, "Do you know what I think?"
Yeah.
Foxtrot Oscar. So another 5 years go by, at which we've been through 2 more production houses. And the second production house, I get phoned by another really excited 3-year-old, saying, the common denominator between all the big, you've noticed all the Scandi dramas, the common denominator, they are, detectives are all strong females. What about making Roy Grace female? That got another foxtrot. So at this point, it was about 2014, and I had worked in television. There was one person that I worked with in television who I really liked and respected, a guy called Andrew O'Connor. Andrew made Peep Show.
Oh, yeah.
And we worked together on a predecessor to that, on a show called Bed Sitcom for Channel 4. And we'd worked on other things. And I knew Andrew was a fan, and he'd moved out to Los Angeles. So Laura, my wife, and I went out there in 2015. And we kind of played tennis with him. And then he said, "You know, what's happening with Roy Grace?" And I told him, and I said, "You know, I would love you to be involved." And he said, "Well, I would love nothing more." He said, "I didn't realize it was possible." And anyway, he said, "Well, let's take it to ITV." So in about sometime during 2016 or 17, we had a meeting at ITV with Polly Hill, and it turned, she just moved there from BBC, having done one of my favorite shows of the last decade, which was the John le Carre, Night Manager.
Oh, yeah.
She'd been responsible for that. And turned out she was a Roy Grace fan.
Oh.
And she said, "What we need is to get the right writer." And she said, "The writer I think would be perfect for this is Russell Lewis. He'd written them Morse and was then writing Endeavour." So we set up a meeting with Russ, and it was amazing. It turned out both Andrew O'Connor and Russ had been child actors together.
Oh, wow.
At the same drama school when they were 13. So we had this riotous meeting, and Russ said, "I would love to do this." He said, "But I'm committed for at least 2 years to Endeavour." And we decided to wait, because most good writers are booked up at least a year and a half. And I'm so pleased we did, because Russ just did an amazing job on the script.
Yeah.
And then we had the casting issue, and who to go for. And ITV said, would you consider John Sim? And I was just blown away, because John Sim is how I had always imagined Roy looking.
Oh, really? That's what I was going to ask you that.
That was the image I had of him. And it was a match made in heaven. He's been such a brilliant guy. And I had, also when it was announced, quite a few, I would say 99% of my fans were delighted. 1% would go, that's not how we imagine him. But all of those negative ones have since, or pretty much all have since written saying, well, it wasn't how we thought, John, but we actually think he did an amazing job.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he carried the character off 100%. It was, yeah. Wow.
And I love how he really thought about detail. The scene right at the early on when Glenn Branson sets Roy Grace up with a blind date. First time he's going to have a date in 9 years. And John goes to the pub to meet the date from hell. And John emailed me the day before saying, as I go into the pub, do you think I should be wearing my wedding ring, or should I take it off and put it in my pocket? And I love that he thought that much about it.
And I found that John played it with just the right amount of awkward. Do you know what I mean? It was just the right amount of uncomfortable in most situations, that when you read your books, that's kind of some of the feeling that you get from Roy Grace, and to see that translated on screen as well, I thought it was such a special touch that I thought John picked up on so well.
Do you know, I'm so delighted to hear you say that, because, and I know John would be as well, because he'd read 11 of the books by the time they shot the first one.
Oh, wow.
He wanted to immerse himself in Roy's character. And also, what I was so happy about was what's key to the books, in my view, is the relationship between Roy Grace and Glenn Branson.
Yeah.
And Glenn too. It's funny because Glenn is based on a real cop.
Oh.
I met back in the early 90s, way before I met Dave Gaylor, and I was just doing a response shift in Brighton, and I was put in the car with a crew of 2, and there was this old sweat, nice guy, but an old school copper, this really energetic black guy, shaven head, and we were sort of chatting, and I said, how old are you? And Glenn said, 32. And I said, are you going for promotion any time? Do you want to stay at PC? He said, well, actually, I've only been in the police a really short time. This is my first week out of probation.
Oh, wow.
I said, really? Probation is the first, their first kind of when they have to go out with a supervisor.
Yeah.
I said, really? He said, yeah. He said, I was a nightclub bouncer. And then one day my kid was born. And I looked down at him and I thought, one day you're going to go to school and somebody's going to ask you what your dad does for a living. I want you to be able to say something you're proud of. Joined the police. And
wow.
Dave Gaylor, my real life Roy Grace, said to me 10 years ago, he said, as and when Roy Grace gets on television, the person who should play Glenn is Richie Campbell. And lo and behold,
all the stars aligned.
Yeah. And I was in answer to an earlier question of yours, I was completely involved in every stage. ITV had just been fantastic to work with. Literally every single cast member was given to me for my approval.
Brilliant.
All stages of the script, I worked with Russ, and so it's been a really happy. And they filmed the second one, Looking Good, Dad.
Yeah, and that's out in the autumn, isn't it? I think.
Well, I'm not sure yet because they've now recommissioned and they're doing the next 3 after that.
It's an exclusive.
So they're going to be, so they may put all 4 out together. So
oh, wow. Oh, watch this space.
Yeah, so I'm very happy about it.
We'll move away from Roy Grace for now, or I'm going to forget the other questions because I could talk about Roy Grace. He's been such a big part of my life for such a long time, as I'm sure he has yours. Right. One book that I wanted to ask you about, which really kind of blew me away, was The House on Cold Hill. Where did you come up with that plot line? I mean, was it something that happened?
I lived in that house.
Did you really?
The floor plan of the house on Coal Hill was my home from 1988 to 98.
Now, I think I'd read that somewhere, but I didn't read it until after I'd read the book. And then I was like, did he really though? Is that true?
Yeah, and that's what gave me the idea. And literally, I'd always been a townie. I grew up in Brighton, and I lived in London. I lived in Toronto, New York, LA for a while. And when I met my then wife, we were both living in Brighton, and my first successful book came out, Possession, which was a supernatural thriller. And I was commissioned to write a second supernatural thriller called Dreamer. And we did The Dream. We bought this big old wreck in the country. And the guy I bought it from, it was it was an old Georgian manor house, quite run down. The guy I bought it from said, "You'll like this place with what you write." He said, "We've got 3 ghosts." He actually lied, there were 4. But the day we moved into this house, it had a very long porch and a long hallway, which went into like a paneled anteroom that you walk through to go into the kitchen. And my then mother-in-law was quite a doughty lady. I mean, she was the chief magistrate of Brighton and Hove, but she had a fey side to her, in that if she ever, she would have a specific dream of somebody that she knew was going to die. That would always, it was like a prophetic dream. Anyhow, she and I were standing in the porch guiding the removals guys in with all their boxes. And I saw a shadow out the corner of my eye just move across that anteroom. And she looked at me and said, "Did you say that?" And my then wife, Georgina, and I had, as I said, always been towners. And we were both a little nervous. This was an isolated house on the edge of a hamlet. And I thought, I do not want Georgina to be spooked out on day one. So I just said, no, I didn't say anything. Anyhow, next day, Georgina was a lawyer. She went off to work, and I was upstairs in the house, in my office, and working. And I went down about 10:30 to get a cup of coffee. And as I walked through this anteroom, I saw tiny little pinpricks of light, some the size of a thumbnail, some like a pinhead, just floating in the air. And I thought it was my glasses. I took them off, put them back on, gone. But then at lunchtime, when I went down again, same thing happened. And same thing that afternoon. And anyway, she came home from work, and I thought, well, I won't say anything. I'm probably just a bit spooked by mother-in-law yesterday. And the next day, same thing. And we had a dog, a Hungarian poodle called Jessie. So I took Jessie for a walk down the lane, and this little old man came up to me and he said, "Oh, you're Mr. James." I said, "Yes." He said, "You just bought the manor?" I said, "Yes." He said, "How are you getting on with your grey lady?" And I said, "What grey lady?" And he told me he used to house sit for the previous owners. They had a place in Ibiza, so they were away a lot. And he said, one November, Sunday night, I was sitting in that anteroom to the kitchen, and we made it into a snug. I had an armchair in there and a telly, because we had the heat from the Arga coming through from the kitchen. And I was watching telly, and this woman in grey silk crinoline, with a really angry face, just came out the wall, glided towards me. She flicked my face with the edge of her dress, stung my cheek, and vanished into the wall behind me. He said, I was out there. He said, wild horses would not get me into the house again.
Oh my days.
So I'm thinking, okay, so I still decide, I think, oh, maybe he's just a nutter. So I still don't tell my wife. And the following Sunday, her parents came to lunch. So I took her mother aside. And bear in mind, this woman was a chief magistrate at Brighton, not a woman prone to flights of fancy. I said, "What did you see last week when we were moving in?" And she described this woman exactly. So then I told my wife, and she said, "Well, actually, I've seen her several times. I didn't want to tell you and spook you out."
Oh my God.
We ended up having, first of all, we had a medium came up, and then a friend of mine who became Bishop of Monmouth eventually, but he was at that time the Vicar of Brighton, but he was also the chief exorcist to the Church of England. Both the Church of England and the Catholic Church have what they call diocesan, they call them ministers of deliverance, not quite so.
Right, okay.
They are called in to investigate anything. And he came out to the house and he said, well, what I'll try doing is I'll try and tell her to go away. And if that doesn't work, we'll have to have a requiem mass and see if we can lay the spirit to rest. And he literally stood in this atrium, in this room, and he said, go away. And with this particular case, everything went quiet for the next 4 years. But then, fun enough, this book, Host, I mentioned earlier, that's been published. And we had an old oak chest that I used to put my latest book on just to show it off to visitors.
Yeah.
And I was having breakfast one morning, and my 7:30, and my wife shouts down, she said, I smell burning. And I turn around, and this book, Host, in this haunted room, was on fire, and literally on fire. And I dived across, I grabbed the corner of it, ran into the kitchen, chucked it in the sink, turned the tap on. There was a perfectly prosaic explanation. There was a round glass paperweight sitting near it, and the sun's ray.
Makes a great dinner table story, though.
So that was how it all began, how it all began.
That's incredible. Tell me then, because Roy Grace uses mediums and spiritual kind of things. Does that stem from that experience, or is that something you're interested in, or is it?
I've always had an open mind about things, but it stemmed from about 25 years ago. I was at a charity dinner, sat next to the then Chief Constable of Sussex, and I said to him, I've been reading about American cops, and American cops regularly, and quite normally, going to psychics for help, whereas here in England, they're subject to ridicule if it gets out. I said, do police officers ever go to mediums? And he said, far more than you realize. He said, if somebody's running a missing persons inquiry or a murder inquiry, and a credible person contacts the incident room and says that they may have picked up something through pendulum dowsing or through mediumship. He said, in my view, if the investigating officer would be derelict in his duties or her duties to not at least follow that up. And I then discovered, started talking to detectives, and I met several, quite a few, poo-poo, nonsense. But I met quite a few who admitted to me that they had. And there was a detective inspector in Brighton who told me he'd actually found and arrested a murder suspect whose address he'd got from a medium in Brighton. He said that same medium gave me 98 others that didn't pan out. But he said I would never diss it completely. And I try with Roy to show him as an open-minded detective. And he doesn't use it; he uses it occasionally, but he's open.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things with Dave Gaylor, when I first met him as my kind of role model for Roy Grace, is that one of the things I realized that what makes a good detective, again, you got on television a lot of the time, you get this cliche, you get this really bolshy detective character on a case, and they're not. Most good detectives have two completely opposing character traits. The first is that they are incredibly anal and organized.
Yeah.
Because every single piece of that puzzle has to be painstakingly fitted together. And yet at the same time, they have a good detective is creative. They have a ability to blue sky think. And they also have a great deal of empathy. They will tend to bond with the victim's loved ones, and it becomes personal. That's why so many detectives, even after they've retired, if they haven't solved a case, they'll stay with it, sometimes even until the day they die.
Yeah, yeah. I've heard that as well, with the detectives taking the case, they take them home with them, but then there always seems to be one particular case that stays with them, and they stay in touch with the families of the victims, forever going forward. Empathy is such a big part of that. Now, I found an interesting fact about your book, Host, And seeing as you've mentioned the book a couple of times now, I'm just gonna put this out there. It was the first electronic novel, wasn't it, in 1993?
It was.
And where can a copy of this book now be found?
Well, it's in the Science Museum.
It's in the British Science Museum.
It's so
That's
funny.
amazing.
It was a funny experience because when I wrote Host, it was about a computer scientist who wanted to live forever by downloading his brain into a computer and then having his body frozen.
Yeah.
And I did a lot of research at the Cognitive Sciences Department at Sussex University. And after I'd written the book, this guy who'd helped me with my research, he rang me one day and he said, "You ever thought of publishing a book electronically?" And Penguin, my publisher on that at that time. So I phoned Andy Wellham, who was the marketing director. And I said, what about at the same time as putting out a print version of Host, doing an electronic version on 2 floppy disks? And he said, how much would it cost? I said, I'll find out. And I found it was about £4,000. So I bring it back. Probably the fastest decision he said he made in his life. They greenlit it the same day.
Wow.
And it came out and 2 floppy disks. And instead of the author photo, it was QuickTime. You clicked on it and I would speak very clunkily. Hello, I am Peter James. And the book came out. I was pilloried. I was on the Today program being savaged by Peter Hobday. He said, "You're trying to destroy the novel, aren't you?" And I remember meeting, I think it was Graham Swift at the Green Room of Sky Books. And he said, who the hell's ever going to read a book on a computer?
Oh my God. I mean, that's 1993.
Yeah.
I mean, that's...
So a few people have read them on computers since.
Just a few. Somebody's made a business out of it. I'm not sure what they're called now.
Spindle, is that it?
That's the one. So moving forward then, the next big exciting thing that you've got coming, and I am looking forward to this. I have my tickets. Looking Good Dead is out on as a stage show. Now it's not the first stage show, is it, of your books? There have been previous ones, but this is the latest one featuring Adam Woodyer and Yaffe.
Yaffe, yeah. This is my 5th adaptation.
Yeah.
And in fact, the last one was A House on Cold Hill.
Yeah.
And then we had Not Dead Enough. Then we had Dead Simple, and we had The Perfect Murder. Yeah. Looking Good Dead, I'm really excited about because it lends itself. It's a real tight thriller. And Adam Woodyer, I think, is going to be brilliant. And Yaffe, I thought she was great in the Syndicate. And
yeah,
I think I love the live theatre. Looking Good Dead starts at the Curve in Leicester, and it's going to tour right the way around the UK throughout the summer into November. Then it's breaking because Adam's got to go to a wedding in LA, and then it's Panto season. Then it's going to start touring again in January, right, through into next summer. And I love the live theatre for a number of reasons. One is with a scary thriller like Looking Good Dead, it's great for people to all be in the same room together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Get the energy. And secondly, I love the fact that things do go wrong in life. Every single page of Left You Dead or Looking Good Dead or Dead Simple you ever read is going to be the same. But every performance of the stage play is different. And I remember with Dead Simple, which had the original cast was Jamie Lomas and Tina Hobley. Jamie Lomas was in the coffin for most of the play. And they had this wonderful set, which was, it had the glass-fronted coffin. And right early on, he is, the story revolves around the groom about to get married, and his mates pay him back for all the bad stag night parties he's arranged for them. And they get him drunk, and the plan is to bury him alive in remote woodlands for 2 hours, then come back and dig him out. And they bury him. They got him drunk, bury him, and they all get wiped out in a car crash, and he's left stuck there. And the staging was phenomenal. They had a van in woods looking out towards the audience, and we see them bury him, and the coffin goes down.
Oh, right.
So Jamie's lying there in the coffin, and then you hear the guys in the van, they're all joking and jostling around, and then suddenly there's this scream, right, and then a mighty bang, and the whole theatre goes pitch dark, even got the emergency lights off. Where we went. Anyway, we're in in one venue, and the first thing that Jamie Lomas, the first thing you hear is after the bang is a silence, and he calls out on the walkie-talkie, he says, where am I? Somebody in the audience shouted out, "You're in Woking, mate."
There's always one.
There's always one. You want an atmosphere killer?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing it in September. It's at the Leeds Grand, so I've got my tickets booked.
Nice theatre. I like that.
Yeah, I do. I've missed it as well. This last kind of 12, 18 months, it's been we like going to see live music as well, and that's been, can't wait to get back out when it's safe to do so. Right, okay, so do my research. I've actually done some research, Peter, you might not know it. I was having a look at Peter James TV on YouTube. You are crazy about animals. You have got llamas and hens and dogs and cats. Now, this was filmed in 2016, I believe. That's the date that's on the video. Have you added to your brood since then?
Yes, we've added and subtracted. We now have some 60 animals.
Wow.
We moved our main sort of home to Jersey, and unfortunately, we had alpacas, which are part of the llama family, and they're a banned animal because they can potentially carry TB.
Oh.
And we had emus that we felt would be too distressed by the journey. And we've now got, in addition to our dogs, Wally and Spooky, our 2 cats, Willie and Mrs. Wu, we've got 4 pygmy goats. 2 are named after wine, Busco and Margot, and 2 are named after serial killers, Ted and Norman. And we've got about 30 hens, and about 35 ducks, 2 educational rabbits that were rescues, some guinea fowl that wander around terrifying people, 5 quail.
Wow.
And we got 1 chicken called Chip that actually sits on my wife's shoulder. That's why we call him Chip. He's a parrot, I think. He just literally sits on the shoulder and walks around quite happily. I think a lot of people say to me, I know all this dark research you do and some of the dark things you write, does it give you nightmares? And yeah, I know I'm not superhuman in any way, but I do find the animals wonderfully grounding.
Yeah.
And I remember, particularly when you wake up to some horrible news. I remember waking up to the news of the Manchester bombing a few years back. And, the world suddenly feels a really dark place. And going out and hand feeding the alpacas capel and carrots and slices of apple. And these creatures, they look at you and they don't know all the terrible stuff that's going on in the world and all the hatreds. They just have this kind of thank you for the tasty snack.
Yeah, very simple view.
It makes you think about when you see one of our cats, Mrs. Wu often sleeps on the bed with us, but in the morning she goes out the bedroom and she lies on the stairs where she catches the rays of morning sun. And you think, we have these incredibly complicated lives. But actually, how simple it is for a cat. She sleeps, and then she goes, we're going to catch some rays.
Yeah. I'm a bit of a crazy cat lady. I've got 2 of my own, but I also do cat sitting. So I sit for other people's cats whilst they go on holiday. And my husband keeps telling me, stop doing that now, seriously. I'm like, no, because for me, there is nothing better than, I know I've got a day in the shed writing, and to go and sit with a cat for 20 minutes, for half an hour, drinking a cup of coffee, chatting to the cat about all the cat's interested in is that I'm there to feed them. I'm under no illusions. I am the giver of food. But it's just, it's something a little bit more life affirming than the darkness that we tend to live in as crime writers.
Totally. And also, I always joke, but I say the difference between a cat and a dog is that you went out and murdered someone, come back home, dog will jump up and down and lick you. The cat will look at you and know you've done it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Lara, my wife, always says the cats look at us and they just go, "Here come the can openers."
Yeah. It's true. It's very true. They, as long as we feed them, and even 9 times out of 10, they don't care if we do, because they'll just go out and get their own food anyway. Okay. Are you reading at the moment? Anything in particular?
Well, I tend to read, I'm flat out writing. I'm halfway through the 18th Roy Grace novel. And so I tend to avoid reading fiction during the actual writing process. And I tend to read non-fiction.
Right.
And I do occasionally kind of make exceptions, but I've read a fascinating book called Humankind.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you've read it, but
I've heard about it. I haven't read it. I think it's on one of my shelves to read.
Its thesis is that we're not fundamentally evil, that humans actually are fundamentally good. And if we weren't, we wouldn't have survived this long as a species. And I find that fascinating. And I'm reading a really interesting non-fiction book called Book Smugglers of Timbuktu.
Oh, yeah.
And a book by Sue Black on forensics called All That Remains. And I read John Sutherland, who's an ex-Met cop. He's written 2 brilliant non-fiction books about policing that I've kind of read recently as well.
Oh, I might have to look them up. John Sutherland.
Yeah, he's a really good writer. I can't remember one called The Thin Blue Line.
I'll have a look for that. Yeah, I read quite a bit on psychology and understanding the mindset of a killer, of a villain or a bad person. When I'm when I'm writing books as well, it tends to help me develop the narrative a little bit more. Is that something that you do?
So you broke up then. I missed the last.
Oh, sorry. I was just saying that in between when I'm writing, I tend to read psychological books that look at the forensic psychology, that look at the mindset of somebody that's, you know, going down the wrong path, or of a serial killer, things like that, because I think it gives me a good idea of the narrative.
Very much. I'm fascinated by what is the difference between you and me and that person that kills. And I go every year normally to a conference in America. It's called the International Homicide Investigators Association.
There's such a thing?
You have to be a serving law enforcement officer to attend. And for years, I used to go with Dave Gaylor, and I was taking back research for Sussex Police. And I saw some extraordinary things there. I think I saw the most, because you get 3 to 5 hour presentations on serial killers, terrorist atrocities, major rapists, and you get the crime scene photographs, what happened, how they solved it, and then sometimes interview with the offender. And the most chilling I saw was Ted Bundy. And there was a guy, Bill Hagmar, who was the FBI
profiler.
And he was the only one that Bundy would talk to when he was on death row. And Hagmar showed us this video in which he said to Bundy, you know, how did it all start? And Bundy said, well, basically Bundy had his girlfriend, came from a kind of wealthy family, had long brown hair with center parting, and she dumped him. And 6 months later, so I was driving on a highway and I saw a girl who looked a little like her, so I picked her up, and then I decided to rape and strangle her. And like Hagmar said, and how did you kill your victims? Well, I used to like to screw them from behind, and I'd put a wire ligament around their neck, and just as I was climaxing, I'd press my lips to theirs, I'd pull the ligament tight, and I'd suck their last breath out so they'd never leave me.
Jesus. My God, I've got the book somewhere. Yeah.
It was chilling.
I've got it. It's Conversations with a Killer. It's wow.
And he is a true, if you have to define a true monster, you know.
Yeah, 100%.
Charming and smart.
mean, when you see him when he defended himself in court as well, the kind of the charisma and the playing with the camera and the whole, winking at the jury and things like that, and you just think that's how he got away with what he did, because he was so slick,
yes,
and so charismatic that he could fool everybody that was in front of him. Yeah. Right, I have taken up so much of your time. I can't thank you enough. I've thoroughly enjoyed chatting to you. I hope it's been a good experience for you as well.
It absolutely has. Yeah. If I could just mention one small thing,
Yes,
I've got a quick read coming out called "Wish You Were Dead."
All right.
Out on the 27th of May. I did one 10 years ago called "The Perfect Murder." It's the government scheme. And this is Roy Grace and his family. So it is actually another Roy Grace book. It's a novella. It's only 100 pages, but he and his family go to the holiday from hell in France.
Oh, okay. Excellent. Oh, right. Well, definitely. Yeah, no problem. And that's called "Wish You Were Dead," and it's out on the 27th of May.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll put all the links in the show notes anyway, so people can click through to it, and I shall definitely make sure that I get a copy. That's brilliant. Peter, again, thank you so much for your time. Thoroughly enjoyed having you, and I look forward to hopefully speaking to you again when the next book comes out.
Great to talk to you too.
Thanks, Peter.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I do hope you've enjoyed today's show. Please hit that subscribe button and leave a review, and if you could tell all your friends about us, that would be fantastic. Crime Books Unlimited is brought to you in association with the Crime Publishing Network, publishers of true crime and crime fiction. To find out more, visit the website www.crimepublishingnetwork.com.